Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. So let's get right into it. President Trump has issued yet another tariff threat to China. Let me explain that in a moment. Then we're going to move on to the Supreme Court's new term, the latest on the ongoing government shutdown, and more. So on Thursday last week, China announced they would further restrict their exports of rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals make up pretty much everything that we use in our tech products. So naturally, there was something that had to be done in response. They threatened this back in April, but trade deals did ease the supply crunch. But needless to say, this was pretty bad. The president had to respond, and he did. He responded threatening 100% tariffs on all items coming from China, which will begin on November 1st, which is about 3 weeks away. He posted on Truth Social, based on the fact that China has taken this unprecedented position and speaking only for the USA and not for other nations who are similarly threatened, starting on November 1st, 2025, or sooner, depending on any further actions or changes taken by China, the United States of America will impose a tariff of 100% on China over and above any tariff they are currently paying. Then he also said the administration would impose exports on critical software as well. So what are my thoughts on this? Well, I have to agree with the analysts that something had to be done here. There was no way the president could just let this happen. At the same time, I'm starting to wonder if this will collapse into a full-blown trade war like it did back in the spring. Remember the 145% tariffs we had on China a couple of months ago? I'm thinking 100% tariffs would probably cut nearly all trade from China because if you think about it, the wholesale cost of an item would double. There's no way an importer or a store can absorb all of it or even most of it, which means buying from the US or any other country would be cheaper, which would make me think that trade between nations would completely stop. And back when they were 145%, that's what happened. Then again, I'm not a supply chain expert by any stretch of the imagination. This may also change, by the way. There's still a few weeks left, and then Trump said he didn't think a meeting with Xi needed to happen anymore. He also didn't cancel the meeting either, so we'll have to see if anything happens. Markets reacted very badly on Friday, although it has improved somewhat as of this recording, which is on Sunday evening. Oil prices on Friday fell 4%. They're now up about 1%. The Dow suffered a 2% drop, and the S&P 500 dropped about 2.5%. So clearly markets were concerned about the possibility of another trade war. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. I tend to think that this is a very volatile situation. It could go either way. It could look like at one moment it's going to be fine, and then the next moment we're going to back to a trade war again. So we'll have to see, and we'll see where we are in the coming weeks. And November 1st is a couple of weeks away. Here at home, this was going to be my lead story. Here at home, the Supreme Court has began its term, and they have even more controversial items this year than they did last year on the docket. So they're going to be reviewing a state ban on conversion therapy for minors, the use of race in redistricting, and state laws that ban the participation of transgender athletes from their preferred sports, Trump's tariffs, and more. So we'll get into it. I've talked about this all summer, various cases that have been making their way to the Supreme Court. One of those is Trump's layoffs, his immigration policies, and more. And as of right now, most Americans' faith in the court system has dropped rapidly. And that's because the Supreme Court has been politicized by both sides in the last 10 years or so. On November 4th, the court will review the legality of Trump's reciprocal tariffs, which were the ones that were announced on Liberation Day, which the vast majority of the tariffs that are in effect at this moment are the reciprocal tariffs. Then there's the case of whether Trump can fire one of the Federal Reserve's board chairs, a Biden appointee, Lisa Cook. Then they have to decide whether Trump's executive order on ending birthright citizenship is legal, but they're not going to decide until a little bit later. And then last week, October 7th, they heard a case about conversion therapy. There was a Colorado law that banned conversion therapy for minors. And I'll provide my thoughts on that in a little bit. I believe the court will strike down that law. Then there is a creation of the black majority districts in Louisiana. I believe the court will strike that down as well because that is a clear violation of the 14th Amendment, even though it complies with the Voting Rights Act. However, the Constitution is supreme against any congressional law. Next, there's campaign finance laws. There's a limit to the amount of money political parties can spend in coordination with their candidate during a campaign. It's quite low in my opinion. It's usually, I think for senators, it's under about $100,000, and then for House members, it's even lower. Not exactly sure. If you're interested in that, please double check my work there. I believe limiting money in politics is a good thing. I also realize there are other loopholes as well, such as creating super PACs and creating PACs on behalf of the candidate. And I do think that this law limiting the amount that a party can give to a candidate is quite ineffective, although I'll have to admit campaign finance is not my area of expertise and not one that I really care about. I'm not sure how the court's going to rule on that, but I would not be surprised if the court strikes it down. And lastly, there are laws banning transgender girls from participating in women's sports. In June, a Tennessee ban on gender-affirming care for minors was upheld by the Supreme Court, and they said they would consider laws from Idaho and West Virginia to determine whether they violate the Constitution. And I expect the Supreme Court to uphold these bans. There are a few others with gun rights and Trump's ability to fire federal workers. That is linked below if you are interested. So my thoughts. Well, I believe the reciprocal tariffs, they are illegal, as is the birthright citizenship executive order. I've talked about them previously, and when the Supreme Court makes its ruling, I will definitely explain that again. I do believe that Colorado's ban on conversion therapy is also illegal, and let me explain that one, because conversion therapy is quite charged, even though it's not talked about very much. So the Colorado ban on conversion therapy was very broad. It even involves telling a 6-year-old that, oh, no, you're not a girl. That would be conversion therapy. And I believe that should be banned for gay and lesbian minors because the science has proven that is completely ineffective, but not for transgender because those laws are used to punish parents for things that are absolutely okay and should absolutely be allowed. So I do believe that law is unconstitutional. Then there's a case reported by CBS of a licensed counselor in Ohio who doesn't force her clients to undergo conversion therapy, but she wants to be able to help her clients reduce unwanted sexual attractions when their clients also want it. She's afraid that is currently illegal under the law. Does conversion therapy work? As I said, the evidence seems to say no, but at the same time, I don't think that's the right of any state to ban that. The Supreme Court should overturn it immediately, if not sooner, as Trump would say. And also, by the way, isn't all therapy conversion therapy? If you think about it, you're trying to be converted from an unwell to a well state. So isn't the whole point to make somebody different, to convert somebody? Anyway, I'll let you think about that. As for race-based redistricting, that is strictly illegal. I cannot believe this has stood up for as long as it has. As I mentioned earlier, it basically gives minorities their own districts, which is a violation of the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment. And frankly, I'm tired of carve-outs for minorities when those carve-outs don't apply to everyone else. For example, creating a black majority district on purpose is legal and sometimes mandated, especially in southern states. Creating an Asian or white majority district on purpose is strictly illegal, and that's horrifying. So I anticipate the court will strike that down, and I hope they do so. Lastly, transgender girls playing in women's sports. I'm completely against this. This should not be surprised if you followed the show for a long time. Definitely economically centrist, but sometimes considered liberal on economics, but I'm not very, as people on the left would say, socially tolerant. And I believe people should play based on their biological sex. Before anyone comments about intersex people, the person who brought up this case is not intersex, and even if she was, every single person, even intersex people, they are either male or female. Every single person on earth. Intersex just means that you can't obviously tell by the appearance of their genitals. And as I said, the transgender woman who brought up this case is not intersex, so it doesn't even apply. And yes, some people can receive hormones, but hormones are simply one aspect of the bigger biological advantages that men have over women. Men still have stronger muscles and larger bodies. It is simply unfair for women who are actual women when they have to compete with men in their sports. And why is it that society has reoriented itself toward trans people? If we have to choose between 15 women and one trans person, we have to make one of those two groups uncomfortable. We always keep choosing the women. Why can't we side with the majority of the women, the 15 women, as opposed to the one trans person? That's wrong, and as I've said on the show, I will always stand up for what is right, and I will oppose what is wrong, and choosing one person over 15 is wrong. And that's why I want the court to uphold this law. And in fact, it should be made nationwide. And I believe Trump has done that. All right, so let's move on to Congress and the federal government shutdown. There has not been many updates, but we do want to talk about the human aspect of the federal government shutdown. I think a lot of people forget about that. For example, federal workers have now resorted to taking out loans to cover everyday expenses. And if you think about it, this is money that they've had to pay back. They'll have to pay back interest on it, and that's money they can't spend on other things. Not only that, but the lack of paychecks is less money in their local communities, not just in Washington, D.C. The last shutdown was 7 years ago, so I think a lot of people forgot how devastating that was. Apparently, airlines have been crippled. The FAA has closed offices across the country, and stations like Newark, Houston, Las Vegas, Philadelphia, Boston, Dallas, and Atlanta don't have enough controllers, and I'm sure it's going to get worse as time goes on. We don't really have any spare capacity in terms of number of controllers, so any amount that call out is a shock to the system. We're essentially living paycheck to paycheck in terms of number of controllers that are in the skies or in the towers that are protecting our skies. Then there's the layoffs, which I suggested that would be coming. By no means did I predict that it was coming. It was pretty clear it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when. As of this recording, the administration has laid off about 4,000 federal workers, which in the grand scheme of things is not very much. But I think it's pretty obvious they're going to be laying off more soon. Probably this week, I assume. Because it doesn't look like a shutdown will end this week. Unions have sued. We'll see if that gets anywhere. Has the public administration sued? And I can confidently tell you that usually people work for the federal government. They accept lower pay in return for job security and benefits compared to the private sector. And obviously that's going to be going away. So, and unless the pay is boosted, which doesn't look like that's going to be happening, in the future, the U.S. government is going to struggle to hire new workers, although that doesn't seem like that's what the Trump administration wants anyway. So as of right now, there appears to be no end to the shutdown. I think we're going to be back here next week, and we're still going to be talking about this. We'll have to wait and see. By then, we could be in a pretty bad situation for a lot of people. Once again, these effects are being felt way outside Washington, D.C. Speaking of far away from D.C., the administration has officially bailed out Argentina. The story of Argentina is quite complicated, and it's not one that I fully understand or want to explain here, even if I did. They just know that they have been struggling economically for a very long time. Really, their inflation rate, for example, has not been below, I think, 5% since the 1940s, and if it has, it's only been briefly. And you think, like, we consider 9% inflation high, they usually have like 100% inflation. So the president of Argentina is a big ally of President Trump and Elon Musk. So we offered them a $20 billion lifeline. The terms and conditions have not been announced as of this recording, and this comes at a time when U.S. farmers are struggling to sell their soybeans abroad because China put tariffs on us and the U.S. government is closed. My question is, as it should be whenever we help any country, is how does this benefit the United States? And I'm not really sure. I do know when I made my decision for president, which if you're interested in figuring out who I voted for, then please take a look at my book. I explained that and explained in detail who I voted for and why I voted for that way. I was looking for a president that would look inward and focus on problems we have here at home, not around the world. It's what most presidents have done, and it's exactly what Trump has done. And they have looked outward and not inward. Speaking of Congress, there was supposed to be a vote to release the Epstein files. We don't know when, and let me explain. This, I think, will be of a lot of interest to many of you, according to polling. The Speaker of the House has the power to bring bills to the floor, which also means he can block them as well. To bypass the Speaker, something called a discharge petition needs to be signed by 218 representatives. There are 217 signatures right now so far to force an Epstein vote, a vote on the files. Democrats and rebel Republicans need one more vote. Meanwhile, the representative-elect I told you about a couple of weeks ago, who was elected in Arizona, has not been sworn in yet. Mike Johnson has taken no urgent steps to swear her in, and which is not how he treated his fellow Republicans. It kind of makes sense he would do this because it's not why take a rush to swear in a Democrat, but he is taking no effort to swear her in. He could have done it weeks ago, still hasn't done it, and this is definitely political interference. He said once Senate Democrats vote for the spending bill the House passed a few weeks ago, they will reopen and they will swear her in. So basically what he's doing is he's doing what he accused the Democrats of doing. He's holding his chamber hostage. And the House was supposed to return tomorrow on October 14th, but it doesn't look like that's going to be happening. The reason for this is the new representative. The reason why it's so important and why you should care about it is because she would be the 218th signature, except she is not a member of the House yet, so right now nothing can happen. The House was supposed to be back last week, but they weren't. Mike Johnson shut the House for an extra week. He's going to do it for another week. And the Senate has been in session. They've been voting and they've been doing committee meetings, but the House has been closed. And while the Epstein files are not an issue I really care about, I do care about preserving the process of Congress. So this new representative needs to be sworn in ASAP, and Democrats need to force a vote to compel the president to release the Epstein files. Even if it eventually fails or it's vetoed or whatever, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work. Democrats need to put Republicans on record as to what is in these documents. Those are my thoughts on that. Mike Johnson claims he isn't withholding or her swearing in because of the Epstein file release, but it certainly looks that way. And before we change topics, I'll just say that the reason why this vote is so bad is because it's expected to succeed. This is bad for Republicans because if there is a vote, they have to choose between voting against the motion to appease Trump and risk the wrath of their base, so they can either pick Trump or their base, or they're going to have to vote for the motion and risk the ire of Trump. This is called a wedge issue. And it's politically smart for Democrats to pursue any sort of wedge issue. As I said, I care about the authority of Congress, as should you, and I'll say this is as well. Democrats are very likely to take control of the House next year, or at least at the end of next year. So this vote is going to happen no matter what. It's a matter of when, not if. And if I were Republicans, I would try to get this vote over as soon as possible so that they can bury it and move on, even if that doesn't end up working. For all the attention that Trump is going to get over this, what I think they need to also think about is that the party is going to need to move on from Trump really within the next few years. For all the attention he gets, at this point in his second term, like you think like it's all downhill from here. His power is going to drop. Every month that goes by, he's going to be less and less powerful. Instead, the sun is going to turn to whoever comes next. Lastly, before we close out, in New Jersey, the governor's race there has tightened a little bit with about 3 weeks left to go. Most polls are showing the Democrat ahead by just 5 to 8%, and I'll definitely talk about this in more detail as the weeks come by. But the Emerson College poll was a bombshell poll. It found that the race was completely tied at 43 to 43%. It is an outlier, but it shows that Democrats can no longer take this race for granted. Meanwhile, in Virginia, that's the other race that's up. The race has been upended by scandal from the Democrat running for Attorney General there, a man named Jay Jones. He was texting that he wanted to see 2 bullets to the head of the state Speaker of the House back in 2022, which was a Republican. Obviously, this guy's not a fit to be Attorney General, but will it affect the race? I definitely think this will help the Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears in her bid for governor. I just can't say how much. Seeing some of these things before, I don't think it's going to help that much. Maybe like half a point or a point at most. I don't think it's going to change that much because, for example, it reminds me of when the Republican candidate for governor in nearby North Carolina last year turned out to be a self-proclaimed black Nazi, and the media speculated over whether this would help Harris win the seat of North Carolina, and it doesn't, or it's the state of North Carolina, and it doesn't seem to have helped her either. Unlike in New Jersey, not a single poll has showed the Republican tied or ahead, not even the Republican pollsters. They have tightened a little bit since June, but that's to be expected as more voters they're more aware of the race, they're like, okay, well, now I know who I'm going to vote for. As of right now, it seems that Democrat Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, she will win by around 10%, maybe a little bit more, which would be about 4% more than Kamlo. She won the state by 12. She won the state by 6%, I believe. The last election was in 2021, and if Abigail Spanberger won by 10%, it would be a 12-point swing toward her. In New Jersey, before we close out, they did have a debate. I didn't really watch it, and I don't recommend any of you do unless you actually can vote in the election. I will say that the Republican ran really close to Trump. He explicitly supports Trump, which is not a great thing in a state like New Jersey. It would be if it was like Tennessee, but it's not. So I'm thinking that he's going to lose. I assumed that before, but now I feel pretty confident saying that he's going to lose. I don't think he's going to win, and we'll have to wait and see as things get closer. I do think the race is going to get a little bit tighter, but I don't think he's going to win. He's not going to be able to pull over the finish line. So that is it for this slightly longer episode than usual. We had quite a lot going on. I know there is a peace plan in Gaza that has been hotly debated on the news, as well as things in Portland. Trump has either sent the National Guard in or threatened to send the National Guard in. If nothing else happens in the next week, that is what we will focus on next week. So thank you for tuning in as always, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.